health. Now, I'm reading. I remember my primary doctor, this was several years ago, the doctor I really, really liked. He was my primary over at Christ Hospital. Really, really liked him. And I went in one day and he announced that he was resigning from the hospital, going out on his own, starting an independent practice that would not be under the oversight of the hospital there. So when he left, they hired a new doctor, and I thought, doctor was my doctor for years. I'll just keep going to the same office and see the new doctor. And I walked in, he introduced himself, and before he said anything, he said, "You need to get on the Mediterranean diet." That's before he knew what I was there for. That's before he read my chart. That's before anything. First thing is you need to get on the Mediterranean diet. There is a group of people that follow what they call the biblical diet. And it's, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but basically they go back and take primarily Leviticus, and the things God said you can eat is what they eat. The things God said not to eat, they don't eat. And so it's called the Bible diet. Some even go back farther than that to the diet before the flood, where they ate no meat at all. But it's still, that's another Bible diet. So, there's all of these things that, know it or not, are actually rooted and grounded in the Bible, even though some people would never admit it. How many of you, don't raise your hand because I don't want to violate HIPAA, but how many of you have been told you have high blood pressure and you need to lay off of pork? Do you know pigs are one of the things that they were forbidden to eat? Under the Old Testament, they were not allowed to eat pork of any kind because not done correctly, pork can have a lot of negative side effects. Blood pressure can be one, cholesterol, all kinds of things. Anyway, that's not our lesson tonight, but it is reassuring to know that what science is just now figuring out, the Bible told us 4,000, 6,000 years ago. Medicine is ever evolving, and I use that in the sense medicine is always changing. Medicine, this was the best doctors, this was the best hospitals, the best medical schools taught that if you got sick, they needed to drain your blood. And so they thought that by draining your blood, they would drain out the impurities and you would get well. Now, I put a little bit of trivia in here. If you don't know the answer, you aren't the only one. In fact, I will be surprised if anybody gets it. But did you ever wonder, curiosity, outside of a barber shop, they have that red and white little thing that twirls outside the barber shop? Did you ever know what that meant and why it was there? Do what? Red is blood. That's where you would go because they already had the knives and everything. That was where you would go to get bled. And that's and if you study back the history of that little red and white twirly thing, that advertised that we are qualified to bleed you if you get sick. Well, this isn't in my notes, but the Bible told us way back in Genesis, the life of man is in the blood. So if they had read the Bible, they would have known that blood, instead of draining it, blood is what keeps us alive. I know I've told some of you years ago, our oldest son was doing an internship in Washington, D.C. He actually got a semester of college by doing an internship there. So we went up a couple times to visit him. And the one time, we took several days and just toured around D.C. We actually went to the theater and sat very close where the president would have sat. We got to actually see the little room where Abraham Lincoln sat. They showed us how that John Wilkes Booth was able to get into the room even though it was locked, and how he was able to shoot the president. And so we were, they were giving us all of this history. Then we walked right across the street, into a little 2-story house, and they took us over there and said, this is where they brought Mr. Lincoln after he was shot. They brought him in, took him upstairs, showed us where he laid, and everybody thinks he died from the bullet wound. That's what I was always taught. He died from the gunshot. But in reality, they said, we got to get that poison out, and they bled him. And according to our guide anyway, he died from loss of blood. They bled him to death. And so Mr. Lincoln died, and they showed us exactly exactly where he was. Many things in medicine that we take for granted today were once unheard of. In fact, I think everybody knows, I like to watch some of the old westerns. I still like The Rifleman. I still like some of those old westerns. And you watch the doctors on these old shows, and you think, wow, how primitive that was. Alcohol, they didn't have chloroform yet. So to knock you out, to do surgery, they would give you about a fifth of whiskey or whatever it took, and that would knock you out so that you didn't feel the pain when they cut you. Drunk people typically don't feel pain, and so they would knock you out with alcohol as an anesthetic. I finished reading a book a few weeks ago. It was a not fiction. It was a factual book. It was based on some of the very first nurses in the medical field, and how nurses were looked down upon. Nurses were considered to be ignorant people. Nurses were not allowed to do much of anything. They were only there to clean latrines, to clean bedpans. They were only there to do the stuff that doctors didn't want to do. And it's like, man, nurses do 90% of your care now. In fact, I know I told you, every time I go to the hospital, I always make certain I tell the nurses how much we appreciate what nurses do. But years ago, nurses were considered so dumb, they wouldn't let them do anything. They wouldn't let them stitch. They wouldn't let them do anything because nurses were considered almost worthless. Wow, how times have changed. I remember I was about 4, maybe 5. I had my tonsils removed, and I don't know why I remember this, but they put a mask over my face, and I could see them dropping drops on the mask, and they told me to count from 100 backwards. Well, I was out by 93, but that was the old what do you call that stuff? Chloroform, thank you. Now, the last surgeries I've had, they have an IV in you, and they just stick a little thing in the IV, push it in, and you're out. I mean, you're gone. No more mask, no more counting the drops. Oh, should I put 5 drops or 10 drops? No more guessing how many drops. They know your weight, they know everything about you. And so when they give it, it's the exact dosage for your weight and everything. Man, I'm sure glad we don't have to guess. I remember, I told my wife this, when I had the pacemaker put in. It's been what, 10, 12, 15, 16 years ago. I actually woke up during the surgery. And I woke up, and I'm in the operating room, and I am, my chest is on fire, and it's like, I raised my head, and I said, "What are you all doing to me?" And the doctor looked at the guy behind me, and I'm out again, But I found out later they had actually shot me, and that woke me up. Man, I'm glad I don't have to experience that on a regular basis. Medicine has made tremendous progress. Watching one of the old westerns, a guy gets shot, the doctor takes a pair of pliers and reaches down in there and digs around, trying to find the bullet and pull it out. Now they x-ray it, and they can tell you within a centimeter exactly where the bullet is. When I had one of my angiograms, I actually laid there, and I watched them put the needle in. I watched it go up through my veins on a screen. I watched it get up. Man, that was unheard of years ago. Medicine is evolving. How many of you remember the old ultrasounds? When my wife was pregnant, we got a lot of those. And it's like, oh, do you see his fingers? All I see is a blob of gray and black. I don't see anything. Now they have 4-dimension sonograms. You can see the freckles on that baby. You can see muscle tissue. Medicine is evolving. The defibrillator has saved thousands of lives. Before you have a heart attack, well, it's one of these things and you're dead. That's it. Same goes for pacemakers. Your heart gives out, you're dead. Medicine has evolved. Can you imagine life before antibiotics? I do have to. Chemotherapy. I can remember back when my grandparents were living. My grandfather died of cancer. Both of my grandmothers died of cancer. And my one grandmother opted not to do chemo because back then, chemo was horrible. It's still not pleasant, but chemo today is nothing like chemo was back in the early days. Today, we have medication for almost everything. We have medication that, had I known it, I probably would not have had the shot where they go in and kill the part of the heart. But now they've got medicine. They can control blood pressure. They can control cholesterol. They can control AFib. They can do a lot of things. Even something as simple as Tums was unheard of 100 years ago. You got indigestion. Well, you got coal oil mixed with a little sugar, and that would either cure you or kill you, one or the other. So medical procedures. I remember my aunt had her child her only child, she was not allowed to get out of bed for like 2 weeks. She had to lay in bed for 2 weeks. And I mean, now you have a baby, you're up and at 'em that afternoon or that night. A broken bone meant weeks and weeks in the hospital and months in a cast. I spent 3 long months in a body cast. Nowadays, they go in, put pins, needles. You're home the next day or so. Heart transplants. Medicine is evolving. Even the Heimlich maneuver, which is saved so many lives, wasn't discovered or invented until my lifetime. Dr. Heimlich was a doctor over at Christ Hospital. He invented the Heimlich maneuver. That's since we have been married. CPR, done right in time, can save lives. Medical knowledge has exploded. Growing up, I had one doctor. He was my head doctor, my heart doctor, my stomach doctor, my arm doctor, my feet doctor, my leg doctor. I had one doctor. Now, you've got a doctor for everything. You know, you've got a separate doctor for your shoulder, another separate doctor for your elbow, another doctor for your hands. You know, you've got a doctor for your stomach, you've got a doctor for your gallbladder. We've got so much knowledge that one doctor can't know it all, so he specializes into one little bitty field. Things change so fast, doctors can't keep up. So what could they have learned had they studied the Bible years and years before? And I've got some scriptures, but I remember reading the very first doctor who thought maybe, possibly, they were doing autopsies on dead people, going from the autopsy straight into OR and doing surgery without washing up or anything, and surgery patients were dying left and right. So one doctor said, I wonder if it could be caused from germs on the corpse that you're taking into the OR. They just about laughed him out of the medical profession. He was an idiot. He was just, almost unworthy of having a medical license. When our kids were born, things have changed, fortunately. But if I wanted to go back and see my wife, and especially if I wanted to hold our baby, I had to stand there with a nurse watching me, and I had to scrub with the scrub brush with this dye stuff. I had to scrub for like 5 minutes. And if I hadn't done it long enough, she would say, nope, you're not done. Keep scrubbing and scrubbing. Now, you can go in, maybe wash your hands, maybe. They don't even require that in a lot of places. But I just thought, sure, I was going to rub my skin away. But what about germs? And I thought about putting lots of verses in. Under the law of Moses, if you touched a dead body, you are to go outside of the camp, and you cannot come back into the camp until you have washed your whole body and washed your clothes, because you touched a dead body. Wonder why God required that. Germs had not been thought of yet. They didn't know germs existed yet. And there were many other instances. If you came near certain contaminated things, and there's a list of those, you had to go out of the camp, completely wash your flesh, wash your clothes, and then before you were allowed back into the camp. In Leviticus, you can read that there. He that beareth the carcass of them shall wash his clothes, be unclean until the evening. They are unclean to you. These also shall be unclean unto you, the creeping things that creep upon the earth, the weasel, the mouse, and the tortoise after his kind. Now, I mentioned this one time. In verse 30, the ferret, the chameleon, the lizard, the snail, and the mole, these are unclean to you among all that creep. Whosoever doth touch them when they be dead shall be unclean until the evening. And upon whatsoever any of them, when they are dead, doth fall, it shall be unclean. Whether it be any vessel of wood, or raiment, or skin, or sack, whatsoever vessel it be wherein any work is done, it must be put into water, and it shall be unclean until the evening, so shall it be cleansed. Now, I think I asked you once. I think I asked you because I'm pretty sure I asked Bernice. I think you were one of the ones I asked. You do a lot of baking. You're baking a cake, and you got it all in the mixing bowl, and you're mixing it up. And while you're mixing it up, out of one of your cabinets, a mouse crawls out and falls in your bowl. What would you do with that mix? Take the rat out and throw it away and hope nobody noticed? No, it would be unclean. That's what God is saying here, way, way back in the time of Moses. If it be a ferret or a chameleon or a lizard or a snail or a mole or any of these things, anything it touches is unclean, and anything in it is unclean. Germs, long before medical science knew anything about it. Human waste. Yes, sir. Mr. Noah. Yes, sir. A snake would be the same thing. You'd still have to throw it away. If you were out camping and you had your hamburger that you had grilled and you're fixing to eat that hamburger and a snake crawls across your plate, that hamburger's gone. Do you like snakes? I'm sorry. No? Hey, I don't either. I hate snakes. I told you that the other day. So God was watching out, even though the microscope had not been invented. They could not see germs. Pasteur had not been born yet. They didn't have the law of pasteurization, but they knew certain things were unclean. And you, in another passage, depending on what it fell in, it could either be broken up, smashed, and thrown away, or it had to be washed. Human waste, common sense. Deuteronomy 23, thou shalt have a paddle upon thy weapon, and it shall be when thou wilt ease thyself abroad, thou shalt dig therein, and shalt turn backward, and cover that which cometh from thee. In other words, you produce feces, you cover it up, you bury it. Why? Because it is now very well known that it can contain lots and lots and lots and lots of germs. What about quarantine? Have any of you ever been quarantined? You been quarantined? In a hospital or just in at-home quarantine? Yeah. I've been quarantined in the hospital twice, but you're still quarantined. same basic principle. Yes, sir, Mr. Noah. Quarantine means to be put someplace where there's nobody but you, and anybody that comes in has to put on a mask and put on a helmet and put on special clothes because you got lots and lots of germs and they don't want to get them. It means you know what isolation means? It means you're put in a room all by yourself. I was, it was either 62 or 63. I came down with double pneumonia. I was in quarantine then because pneumonia was contagious. And then a year later, I came down with spinal meningitis. I was really quarantined, that time. I mean, the highest quarantine. And then a couple of years ago, when COVID hit, and I had to be admitted to the hospital, I was in quarantine until they got my COVID test back. But it means that you're in a room all by yourself. You know what? The Bible quarantined a lot of people. In Numbers, God tells them that every leper, everyone that hath an issue, whosoever is defiled by the dead, they're to be quarantined. I was reading a few weeks ago, not so much in America, but in other countries, leprosy is coming back in a rage. Leprosy, according to what little I've read, leprosy is very contagious. So what did they do? Moses said, if you are a leper, you're quarantined. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I'm hard hearing, sir. Oh, you're more than welcome. You'll never learn anything if you don't ask questions. That's how you learn. Very good. Sometimes I wish more people would ask questions. But they were quarantined. Now, I know you mentioned quarantine today. We should quarantine all lepers today. You'd probably get shot, burned out, or something. But the Bible understood somebody has got an infectious disease, you quarantine them. Put them outside the camp. Then we also find out that wine was used very much in the Bible. It was a very big part of many of the sacrifices. But even beyond that, in Luke chapter 10, the Good Samaritan sees this guy laying over on down in the ditch. He's been beat up. He's been robbed. He's been left to die. So the guy goes over, binds up his wounds, poured in oil and wine, set him on his beast, took him to an inn, and took care of him. Wine was the primary sterilizer for many, many, many years. It was used in many of the sacrifices, but it was also a medicine. The Good Samaritan poured it on this guy's wounds. He bound them up, poured the gauze, poured oil and wine to help heal the wound. It's still popular in some areas. Now we've got so many other things, but in a pinch, wine is still a tremendous disinfectant. They use iodine now in the hospital. At least when they've operated on me, she'll come in, shave wherever they're going to be cutting, and then she'll scrub it down with iodine, and it doesn't come off for 6 months. But wine was considered a very medicinal thing, even in that day. Paul told young Timothy, They didn't have tongues. We don't know what Timothy did have, but he was having some severe stomach problems. Perhaps, some speculate, maybe it was from drinking the water. We do know the water was very polluted. So maybe he drank some water and got sick. Maybe he had the flu. We could what if, like I said the other night, we could what if all day. But to help with his stomach condition, Paul told him to drink a little wine for his stomach's sake, and not just his stomach, but his oft infirmities. They had medicine. They didn't have everything that we have today, but they did have medicine, and they used medicine to cure things to the best of their ability. All right, any other real quick